Let's hope so.
It's transcribed here, so yeah. Yep, we're
Oh,
good.
cool. Okay. So I'm saying you're saying everything.
Wait, do y'all think it's recording this?
Well, it's recording from here.
Go to the Microsoft Teams
Yeah, it's recording now. So.
and then go to share. And then
Wait, we don't need it because
Yeah,
we'll switch it
I'll start
after the
talking.
guest speaker.
yeah. Okay.
Okay. Right. Okay. Welcome everyone to our last meeting of the semester. Our speaker is Miss Sarah over here, so I'm gonna turn it over to her. I don't know where to sit. I'll just sit over here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Ludwig. Thank y'all for having me. Corinne, thank you for asking me to speak today. Corinne asked me to share a little bit with you about my journey to become an RD and getting my PhD. So a little bit of background information about me. I am from Lafayette, Louisiana. If you're not familiar, it's about an hour west of here. I completed my bachelor's at UL and my master's in internship at McNeese. And I am currently in the PhD program here, Human Nutrition track, and I am a PhD candidate, all but dissertation status. This means that I have completed all of my coursework and other requirements. I have completed my general exam, which is an oral exam and a presentation of my research. I did that in the spring semester, and so my research is ongoing, and as soon as I complete that, I will defend my dissertation and graduate. So I am a clinical dietitian. That is my background as a dietitian. My first job was with Baton Rouge General, and I served as maternity leave relief. I was graduating, looking for a job, and the only job that I could apply for at that time that I met qualifications for that was open was maternity leave. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but the job market in Louisiana at that time was extremely competitive for dietitians, and there were a lot of entry-level dietitians coming out, but not as many jobs available. And so that was one of the ones that I had found. And then from that job, I went to Our Lady of the Lake, which is my full-time job. Prior to going back to school, I changed a little bit of my work background in order to facilitate school. And so I went from a full-time status to a PRN status, or as needed at the hospital. So my journey to become an RD, I don't really have a special story or connection. Some dietitians out there or other professionals from different fields have this burning desire and, you know, this long-standing history. Maybe they had some kind of disease growing up and then found a way to nutrition. I really don't have any kind of connection like that, but I am here nonetheless and have enjoyed my career so far. It was actually not my first major. Whenever I was an undergrad at UL, I started in elementary education and I enjoyed it. I did an observation of a class and I really liked it, but kind of felt like, I don't know if this is something that I can do day in, day out and, you know, see myself being completely happy. So I went to another major and I spent a few years in accounting at UL and really enjoyed that, but same kind of feeling. I don't know if this is right for me to do all the time. I really wanted to do public accounting over private because I felt like there were a lot of advantages to that and I could see myself more clearly in a public setting, but I didn't want to do tax season and have my entire life planned around that year. So I just kind of felt like, well, you know, where do I go from here? I have a lot of family in the medical field, immediate and extended family. And I have a couple of family members that are close who are RNs, and including my mom and my sister. My sister is now an NP, but I felt like nursing, as great as it is of a field and how rewarding, not for me, that's too much patient care for me, but I still want to be involved and I want to make a difference for a patient. So my sister suggested doing dietetics. And at that time, I really had no idea what dietetics was. And so I kind of felt like, okay, well, I've heard a little bit about it. I've researched and that sounds like something I might be interested in. But at this point, let me just go ahead and switch and try it and see if it's something I like, because I don't really know until I try. And this is a big decision. So I switched and ended up finding that it was something I appreciated. There were some overlapping personality traits that were similar between each of the fields that I had started in majoring at UL. Surprisingly, maybe to some, but it required me to be detail-oriented, organized, logical, very critically thinking, looking at problems as a whole, all of those kinds of traits that really behoove somebody in each of those fields. And so I felt like, okay, this is something that I really like, and I continued on, and it really became a passion of mine over time. And looking back, I think back to a little bit older than all of y'all, so I don't know if this is something y'all really remember, but I think back to whenever I was little, looking at the boxed items in our pantry and looking at the food guide pyramid. That was something that I grew up with. And so whenever I was little, I really liked that. And I was very fascinated by that organization, that structure to those items. And I wanted to know more about it. But I didn't have a nutrition class growing up. And so it was just kind of something that over the years I looked at and I kind of researched, but I didn't ever have formal training in until I went to school. So, education has always been important to my family, including my extended family and myself. And so I told you that I started my education in elementary education at UL. And so I've eventually found my way to a PhD. So I'll go into that a little bit, but it has resurfaced for me over the last several years. So just something to share with you. You never know where you will end up in life and how something will connect in order to make a bigger picture for yourself. Really believe that everything happens for a reason in life, and along the way sometimes those reasons aren't obvious, but you can look back one day and you may have a better understanding as to how all of those pieces connected along the way in order to get you to where you are ultimately. So my internship. Went to the internship fair at Fancy each year whenever I attended the conference. I looked at all of the opportunities on the ASN website. So all of the accredited programs, I sat down over a period of several weeks. I created a ginormous spreadsheet. I told you I'm organized. I had every kind of thing that I could consider to be important, every criterion. I'm very family oriented, so I looked at the location of where the program was held. I looked at the distance from home so that it was a place that I could easily travel to and from within a several hour period. I looked at if the program required a master's, because I knew that I wanted to pursue a master's one day and eventually possibly a PhD. I considered if the program had a GRE score requirement and what that was, and then also the program concentration. So I organized all of these things. I included material about the program website and what the cohort size was. I imagine all of y'all are in varying stages of your career at LSU, and so that's something that I would suggest y'all do. It doesn't have to be on as formal of a scale as this big spreadsheet, but whenever you're looking at internships, it can be very overwhelming and daunting, and there's a lot to consider. But I would sit down and really put pen to paper, or sit in front of your computer, and whether it's a pro-con list or creating weighted criterion like I did, but something like that. Let's see, I visited a couple of top contenders and met with the program directors that I felt I could really see myself in. And then I ranked those programs that I felt were the best fit for me. So after internship, it brought me to my first job. I kind of mentioned that the market was extremely competitive at that time, probably way more so than it is now. So there were few openings at that time. And so my first job was maternity relief at Baton Rouge General. And I began there knowing that the position was for a very definite period of time. And, was open to staying if possible, but they didn't have anything that they could create for me, unfortunately. And though I love the organization and especially my supervisor, I needed a full-time job. I needed benefits, and that was something that they couldn't afford to me. So I was recruited by the Lake with a full-time offer. And so with that came benefits that I was looking for. And so I transferred over to the Lake and accepted that full-time position several years ago, June of 17, and I stayed on PRN with Baton Rouge General, and I continued to work with them over a few years, just working, a few shifts here and there over, a few months at a time. And so my second job, again, was as a clinical dietitian at the Lake. So I have only been clinical as a dietitian, so to speak. I have used all of my skills and training in a different setting within education, but really within the clinical sector is where I have lived. So at the Lake, I, began as an entry-level dietitian. So that meant that I was assigned the lower acuity floors and really oriented myself to the hospital and learned what clinical life is truly about, since I had spent a short time at the General in the clinical realm. So I, over the years, worked my way up and covered the higher acuity levels and higher acuity patients to routinely see them as my skill set evolved. I really love the clinical environment. I told you that's where I've lived my full career as a dietitian. There's just something really special about it to me. I like a challenge. And so whenever I walk into the hospital for my shift, I never know what I'm going to see whenever I get there. My entire day could be, Pandora's box, truly. And so it can evolve throughout the day, even many, many times. But I find that it is very challenging for lots of reasons, primarily that, because you just don't know what you're going to see whenever you get there. There are so many intricacies to patient care within the clinical environment, in my opinion. And this is so true and more true each day as patients are sicker and sicker with so many comorbidities. I saw that whenever I was in internship and, my patients had maybe, 3 major disease states. However, now they have 5 or 7. It's evolved quite a bit and become more challenging in that way too. With that, there is a lot of demand in working with the social worker and case manager because a lot of patients have different social circumstances that must be considered while you're taking care of them in the hospital in order to make sure that they're discharged safely and can effectively manage their care at home. And, you've probably heard from your MNC classes or, if y'all do a clinical rotation here at LSU, that discharge planning starts on day 1 of admission to the hospital. And that's very true. So there is a lot to consider in patient care within the clinic. So I told you that I went from a full-time job to PRN status at the Lake. I had essentially come to a crossroads at the hospital and just feeling like, as much as this was rewarding and fulfilling to me, there was something that was just pulling me a little bit, and I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. So I felt like I was at this crossroads. And so I called up my undergrad program director and mentor and said, this is where I am. This is what I'm feeling. What do you suggest I do? And so at that time she said, well, you've always wanted to do a PhD. Why not now? This is really a great time in your life. You are single, you don't have children, you're pretty stable in your career, and you know where you are, where you want to go ultimately. And I think that this is something that you really should consider since it's something you showed an interest in a long time ago. And that is true. I had a lot of family that had pursued higher education. My grandfather was very high up in administration and teaching at the university. And so this was something that I always knew I wanted to do. But, I told you in my decision of majors, I kind of hopped around initially. And so I knew that a PhD was something I always wanted to do in whatever field I ultimately landed. So I said, well, maybe you're right. And it was a decision that I didn't take lightly by any means. I knew that it was something that was going to require a lot of me. It was a very big commitment. And so I prayed about it a lot. And there were certain things that happened over a period of about 2 days. It was a very short time. And so it ultimately led me to the decision of that, okay, this is something I really should be doing now. So I talked to somebody who was currently enrolled in this program in the human nutrition track that I'm in, and talked to her as a current student, found out what her thoughts were on the program, what her goals were in the short term and long term, and felt like it was something that closely aligned with me and something that would be a good fit for me. So I made an appointment and met with the graduate coordinator at LSU in our school, and I decided to apply to the grad school. And my GRE scores were lapsing within about 2 weeks. So it was a very quick turnaround time because I did not want to take that GRE again. So I quickly got everything together, all of my paperwork completed, and applied and was accepted and started a couple months later. So I am currently a candidate. Like I said, I've completed my coursework, and I have completed my coursework. I have been working the entire time that I have been in school. I'm a self-paced student. I'm not a graduate assistant or anything, so I have no financial assistance from the university or the government. So I have paid my way, and I've worked several jobs throughout my entire schooling. So I've only been able to take 1 or 2 classes at a time for the most part until the last couple of years. I took a massive change in stepping back at work in order to better facilitate schooling. I probably didn't explain this well earlier, but I switched jobs in order to start school because I felt like it would really allow me more flexibility to work in the job that I ended up taking. It was going to be too much at the hospital, I felt, to attend classes on campus here and try to see my patients and chart and go back and forth. So I ended up changing jobs at that time. And so whenever I got to the point where it was just too much with working, 3-4 jobs, I decided to take a step back and primarily focus on school. And so that's allowed me to take more classes each semester. So I am now at the point of having completed coursework. I did my general exam in the spring, which I mentioned earlier. It required me to give a presentation of my research thus far and to complete an oral exam with my committee. So came in actually this room, and they asked me any kind of question that they wanted on any topic. And so I answered all of those. Very scary, I'll agree. Very intimidating, but I completed that in the spring. And so I am now a PhD candidate. I have that title. And I am ABD all but dissertation, just meaning that the last of my requirements is my dissertation. So my research is in progress. It is comprised of 2 studies. One study has been done for a while. The second study is ongoing. And my topic is food literacy with adults and type 2 diabetes. So my first study was to create and validate a questionnaire for this population. And so again, that's completed. And my second study has been an intervention. So we are doing that within a couple of diabetes clinics associated with the lake and looking at administering the questionnaire before they begin their classes, their educational program, diabetes education and counseling that they already have established, and then completing the survey again at the end to measure a change in behavior, hopefully. So that's where I am. Once that study is completed, I will wrap up my writing for that dissertation and then defend. So that's my career in a nutshell. I'd like to open up the floor to any questions that you may have. I'm happy to answer whatever I can.
What do you see doing in the next 5 years or something with that piece?
That's a great question. And that's even evolved over time too. And I failed to mention I'm an adjunct professor with the university, so I teach online. I would love to be able to teach in the classroom more consistently than I have in the past. So, I've always felt that education was truly my calling. And I told you I started in elementary education. Patient education and counseling within the hospital setting has always been a very big passion of mine. So I think that I'll definitely continue pursuing education, but in what capacity, I'm not exactly sure. I'm open to opportunities. Like I said earlier, I really feel like you don't necessarily know where you're going to end up. You may start somewhere and you may, take some turns here and there and sometimes you don't always know if that's even what you should be doing. And, you're kind of scared about it, nervous, but just have faith that you're going to ultimately end where you're supposed to be.
Mhm.
So, I look back on my career and, it definitely was very closely intertwined with my personal life too. I started with that job at Baton Rouge General, again, knowing that it was for a very defined period of time, but I had to start working and, do something. And I was dating somebody that brought me to Baton Rouge. It wasn't really on my radar. And that relationship ended several months later. And so I ended up going to the lake, simultaneously. And I, didn't necessarily know what I was supposed to be doing.
Mhm.
I felt fulfilled, but what am I supposed to really be doing ultimately?
Yeah.
That kind of feeling as happy as I was. And so ultimately the decision that came with going back to school, after a couple of things happened over that short period of time, that ended up leading me to my husband, have a baby, there are so many things that have happened along the way that never would have happened.
Yeah.
And so fully explain that my husband's from Pennsylvania. I mean, I would have never met him. He would have never met me if certain things hadn't happened in each of our lives
Yeah.
along the way to lead us here. So, I'm thinking education, but at the same time, we'll start there maybe and we'll
Yeah.
see, where it end up.
Sweet. Whenever you were at UL for your undergrad, was that whenever they still had the dietetics program, or was that whenever it was like nursing with the nutrition, whatever they have now?
So I was part of the last class of dietetics at UL, and they had their internship. And I'm trying to remember, how is that happening? They were phasing everything out. I think the internship wouldn't have even been a possibility for my class on, maybe. And so I was looking elsewhere to do an internship, but I was part of that last undergraduate class.
Okay. I was wondering. So I was like, I know they got rid of that, but I don't know.
Yeah.
when that
Well, I'm
was.
saying the last undergraduate class, like I was able to complete everything. So was, the people behind me, those few students, but we were like that last complete class, if that makes sense. So, I started there, ended there, but the program was the most intact with my class. After that point, they began, phasing things out, and it looked very differently than whenever I had started.
Yeah, because that was just, it's completely fine.
Right. Unfortunately, it folded.
Yeah.
So,
Any other questions for anyone?
yes, sir.
How did you get into your topic of research or that realm of specifically doing?
That's a great question. So the whole process of, being paired with a major professor, all of that was foreign to me. So I talked to that student that I had met with that was in that program at the same time. And so she suggested just, looking online at the LSU nutrition website and reading about the professors here, seeing, because each professor, they have listed a major topic research area, and seeing if there's anybody that I felt aligned with my interest. And so I ended up landing with Dr. Turi, and she does research of this type, a lot of survey development and quantitative research. So, looking at numbers as opposed to words. And so I ended up talking with her after speaking with different professors in the department. And she had a student that started with food literacy, and it was just very broad food literacy with college students. And looking at my clinical background, we said, well, there's got to be something, that I can use and, kind of take as an offshoot from this study. And so I definitely have just always, I guess, been gravitating towards diabetes in a way. I, as an intern, loved diabetes camp. That was something, I don't know if, I've heard mixed things. I don't know which programs still go to diabetes camp in Leesville and which ones don't. But if you attend an internship that does, it's an awesome experience, in my opinion. It's definitely not everyone's cup of tea, sure, but I think it's great. They definitely have a wonderful service that they provide to those families. And so from there, I really enjoyed my diabetes camp experience and felt like that was something that was interesting. It's definitely a challenging disease, whether it's type 1 or type 2, and enjoyed my diabetes rotations in internship too. And through the hospital, I've encountered a lot of patients with diabetes, primarily type 2, being that I work with adults. We really, at the lake, don't see any children. Every now and then there's somebody that may be like 18, but we see adults, not as an legal adult, yes, but type 1 diabetics aren't as common. They're more rare in general. And so I've worked with a lot of patients with type 2 and those complications. And so through our discussions with Dr. Cherry, it was just kind of something that evolved that, I have a good background in this. This is something that's interesting to me. So we evolved that original project that was food literacy with undergrad students to include food literacy with type 2 diabetics. So it's just kind of something that happened over time. And that first study, I really saw some interesting results. So it's very fascinating, and I'm excited to see where it all goes. Yes, sir.
Can you share some of those results that you found?
Oh, sure. Let's see. So the first survey, I found a lot of different things that I would say one of the most exciting points that I was able to make is just that food literacy is a new topic within the last 10 years or so. And nobody has really, as far as I've found, nobody has looked at a population like those with type 2 before. And what seemed to keep popping up over and over again is just that, and I found this in my own practice at the hospital, this is definitely something that I've seen firsthand over and over again, is that you find a patient who may or may not have been educated initially at time of diagnosis, but if they were educated, that might have been 10 or 15 years ago. And things have definitely changed over time, even with type 2 management, because just think about all of the drugs that are out there to manage type 2. There's a lot now, and there definitely weren't that many, 10 years ago. So that's very overwhelming for sure. And so, they may or may not have been educated and counseled at time of diagnosis, but again, that could have been a long time ago. But a lot of patients that I found actually didn't have any education at all, unfortunately. So again, they could have been diagnosed 10 years ago, it might have been a couple of years ago, whatever, but they never had that initial education. So they don't necessarily know how to properly manage it. They, may be taking their medicines, they may not be compliant with that, but otherwise, as far as nutrition goes, they're just kind of winging it. And so that was something that was interesting. And so in another round with that same study, I ended up asking more questions as far as it was a decision tree. So, if you've said yes to this, then you're funneled with this question. If you say no, then you're presented with this one, that kind of thing. And so, I asked, okay, if you've not had any education, is that something that you're interested in? And the vast majority, 90% of them said yes. But then of that group, again, another 90% said that they don't know how to go about getting any education at all. And so it was okay, wow, we're really missing the boat here. Because again, if we've even educated them at this first time of diagnosis, great, might not have. But then again, over time, they're not necessarily getting that continuing education. And like I mentioned earlier, meds change, different, fad diets come up. There's lots of different things that can affect a person's management and their success over time. But, the way that I see it is like any kind of career. Most careers have a continuing education requirement. I know I have one. Y'all will whenever you join the profession, or if you go a different realm in the professional world in healthcare, you'll definitely have one. So not that we should have a formal education requirement per se, but there's no continuing education for these patients. And so unfortunately, a lot of them are just falling through the cracks. So that was a common thing that I kept seeing pop up over and over again, is that most of them had never had formal education. And then most of them, that group, don't know how to even go about getting it. So, I mean, it was very evident, even with just anthropometrics that I collected, basic anthropometrics of the self-reported height and weight, and I calculated a BMI at that point. And BMI, of course, is not a perfect measure of anything, but it's a starting point. It's something that we use a lot in the clinical capacity as a starting point. And, the CDC still uses BMI. So, all of those kinds of things that I asked and the data that I collected, it definitely pointed to the fact that there's a lot that we're doing right, yes, but there's a lot of room for improvement for sure. Yes, ma'am.
Did you ask why they didn't see a dietitian, if they couldn't afford it, or if they didn't even think to go see a dietitian?
That's a great question. No, we didn't ask that at the time. That's something that I could definitely consider trying to weave into in the future, if I can follow back up with that same population, or if we have a spin-off study looking into that, because I think that you're onto something with the fact that just access is a huge barrier. Unfortunately, the way that dietitians, can't code for insurance can be a huge barrier for patients and, nutritional management and education. I know that firsthand what I can speak to in the hospital, I was constantly left and right referring patients to one of the clinics that I'm now working with, because again, like I said, I found the same thing. Throughout all my years of practice, I would find a patient that was diagnosed 10 years ago, 5 years ago. We'd ask him, have you ever met with the dietitian? No. Okay, well, is this something to be interested in? This is something that a dietitian can offer you on an outpatient basis and try to help you, achieve these kinds of goals. And I mean, all of them said yes. So, I would make so many referrals day in and day out. So I think that access is definitely most likely a good barrier. I think that, possibly with any kind of population, any challenge, just an interest could be an issue for some. I would imagine that there are a lot of feelings of just overwhelmingness of a diagnosis like that. That's something I've seen firsthand a lot of times. It's just that, many patients, unfortunately, aren't super well versed in what this disease is or could be. And so sometimes whenever it's diagnosed, it's at the point of a very high A1C and we're already seeing diabetic complications. And so they might be extremely overwhelmed. And, it's not just looking at managing their blood sugar, it's looking at the fact that they now have heart involvement, maybe renal issues, maybe, eyes are affected, maybe this, that, it's kind of a domino effect, unfortunately, with a lot of them. And so, I think that that's probably something else too. A lot of times compliance can be a challenge and an uphill battle for a lot of patients with type 2. Again, also, I think largely due to that. It's another, I told you, I like things that are challenging. It's definitely a challenging environment working with patients with type 2, I would say, but it can be very rewarding like anything. Yes, sir.
Do you ever see patients get diagnosed with type 2, but then the physician doesn't refer them to a dietitian at all?
Mm-hmm.
And so are they just prescribed a medication and just kind of sent on their way?
Yes, unfortunately. And so I think that, can be another aspect to what Karen was asking me. And unfortunately, I wish I could say that I've been able to sit down and have those kinds of conversations with, most likely it's the hospitalist that's managing their care. And because again, being clinical, that's really all I can speak to firsthand. I wish I could say that I've really been able to sit down with the hospitalist and talk about it and say, hey, did you know, that we have this service and this and that? And I have over the years been able to do that occasionally, but I've not been able to every single time by any means. Unfortunately, it's something that, an MD must do. I can't directly officially make the referral to the clinic. I feel like if we had that capacity, then a lot of things could possibly be different. But, unfortunately, we don't. And so it requires me to call up the MD sometimes because I could put it in my note, but it might be missed for various reasons. And so, I call up the MD, or if I'm on the floor and I happen to run into the MD, talk to him or her about it. And I mean, I can't ever recall over the years talking to an MD and that MD being completely disinterested and like, no, I'm not going to do it. Unfortunately, sometimes there were some that were probably just newer and there's so much to learn in orientation. And so they didn't know maybe about this outpatient center that we have. But, you know, as soon as I educated them on it, again, they were definitely open to the idea of referring the patient. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that was-
Okay. I feel like I'd probably take that in a different direction. But, you know, I think that education, looking back at my career, that's definitely been something that just keeps coming up as a recurring theme for me. Because, again, I've always loved education, you know, whether it be with a patient or in a classroom setting more formally. And so, you know, I just feel like there are a lot of topics where we can't seem to learn enough. There's always something to learn. You know, you think that you might kind of reach that limit, hit the glass ceiling, but there's always something that you can learn there. You know, that's the reason why from a healthcare perspective, you know, multidisciplinary team approach is necessary, because one person isn't supposed to be able to do it all. You can't manage everything. There's going to be something that you just can't speak to. You're not trained in, or, you know, you'll miss whenever you look at something. You become desensitized when you look at it all day long. And so somebody else coming in behind you might see something that you missed. So, you know, I think that a multidisciplinary team approach is necessary for that too.
Any other questions? I'll wrap up the meeting and then we'll take a group picture all together.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Y'all for having me. Am I supposed to wait? I don't know.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Should I switch the camera or should I just leave it like this?
Just-
I think it's just leave it. Okay. Thank you to everyone that donated for the Thanksgiving baskets. There's a picture right there of all the baskets. All right, and then if you're participating in a Tiger to Tiger mentoring, don't forget to track your meetings and then contact Hannah if you have any questions. Track your volunteer hours. Allison's going to send the volunteer opportunities in the meeting recap, and then they always have the Google Doc with all the volunteer opportunities listed. All right, coming soon. So if you pre-ordered and still need to pay, I still need to pay. I forgot, so I'm going to put it in here. Please do so by Friday. The pre-order prices are still being honored, so you can either pay in cash, check, or you can Venmo. And then Dr. McKinley is going to let us know the pickup times. First come, first serve for anyone who didn't order from the pre-sale. All right, member of the month is Hannah. She did a good job managing the mentoring, attending meetings. She's always here. She helped us with this computer today. And yeah, thank you, Hannah. All right, and then spring semester meetings. That's just a reminder, don't forget to attend. And then we have them listed on the bookmarks over there also. So if you want to take one of those. It's not too late to join SNDA if you haven't. It's just $20. Okay, thank you for attending. If you have any questions, speak to me after the meeting, and please come up to take a group picture. Okay, how do I stop this? I don't want to accidentally delete it, so. Corinne, you got that.
Make sure you sign the attendance.
Yes, sign in.
Anyone?
I think everyone did. Donovan, did you sign it? No. Here you go.
Where is it? Is it up there?
It's probably over there.
I'll sign it.
Okay.